Hello and welcome to Arts Alive Books. Joining me in the studio tonight is author Sean Connoly. Later on in the show, we'll be meeting Philip Battle of Urban Canvas, who has written a book on Lady Screever, the world's first pavement artist. But first tonight, Sean Connoly was once a bombardier in the British Army, but has dropped his sword to take up his pen, and he's done so to massive critical acclaim. His down-to-earth books depicting the life of the humble British soldier and his tales of his tour of duty in the Caribbean country of Belize, which is entitled British Army on the Rampage, are gritty, raucous, unvarnished, and they've met with a rapturous critical response. Sean, you're very welcome to the show.
I'm humbled to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
You're very welcome. So, I want to talk a little bit about the books in a while, but do you want to tell us a little bit, first of all, about your background and the background to the books themselves?
Yes, certainly. The books had nothing to do with the military to start with. The books were as a result of a children's character that I'd invented while I was writing some poetry about 20 years ago. Surprised. I'd invented this character called a Munkarot, and a Munkarot is half a monkey and half a parrot.
Okay.
You're wondering where this is going, aren't you? Okay, I'll put you right. Okay, what happened was we were sat round the family table one Sunday afternoon, and I'd met this chap called David Richardson, who's a TV director. He'd listened to this story that my wife at the time had told him. I'd written a poem about this Munkarot. He wanted to see the poem, so she showed him the poem. He asked me what this Munkarot looked like, and I said I would have to write it down on a piece of paper, for which he said, well, go away and do that. So I went away and I wrote 3 sheets of A4 paper, passed it to him. He sent it to somebody unknown to me at the time, a gentleman called Andy Fontan. He was the illustrator for the Dandy comic. And he sent this picture back to me. And to cut a long story short, what happened from there was David set up a meeting with an author for me after asking me to write a children's story. And I was unsure how to write a story of any description, but I put together this story. So I met with this author, and when I went to pass her the story, she sort of pushed it away, and she said, what are you doing writing children's stories, something that you don't know about, something you've invented, when you were in the army for so long? And I was taken aback. I didn't know where she was going with this. So I said, you'll have to explain. She said, people would kill for military stories, for army stories. So I was shocked. I was still passionate about the children's stories. She said, go away and write a chapter of a book. And of course, again, I was unsure. So I took a lot of advice from David. I bought the Authors and Artists yearbook, and I wrote the first chapter of British Army on the Rampage.
Which is this book?
Yeah, which is this one. This was the first one. So I sent her the first chapter over, and within a couple of hours, she sent an email back to David saying, I need to see the rest of this book. So that was the background behind it.
That's the background behind the kind of the decision to move into writing. But there is another background, isn't there, which is your own personal story about growing up and getting into the army. And
Yeah, that came a little bit after. I finished this book, and then I had, because I didn't realise how big a book should be, I was very naive, and I'd failed to take any advice on that part of it. That book would probably be twice the size it is now, but when we put it to the editors and the proofreaders, they sort of came back and said, that's far too big for a book. So I took half the stories away, re-edited it, revamped it, and of course I was finished with this, still a good book, but I wanted to make it into a fiction book. While I was in the army, I did something I'm not very proud of. I threw a hammer at one guy when I was a young soldier, and it hit him on the leg. So my nickname was Sledge. They called me Sledge. So he was my character for my my fiction books. So that's where the second book come from. But while I was writing that book and this book, I had this feeling there was something I needed to do. I was getting quite emotional about some of the stories. Hence the reason I then wrote Surrogate Fathers. Every time I mention my father and my childhood, I got this emotion that I needed to put down on paper, and that's where Surrogate Fathers came from.
You're writing a combination of fiction and a kind of memoir in some ways, aren't you?
The two books you're holding are 99% non-fiction. The other book, the e-book for Gunners and Grenades, is fiction.
Yeah.
The next one we're calling Friction, because it's probably 90% true.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your experiences in the army then, on which these books are based.
Okay, what I did was when this author wanted to the full book of British Army on the Rampage, I did a lot of deliberating, and I looked at that everybody had written everything about every conflict going. You know, they'd done the Falklands to death, they'd done Afghanistan. So I decided to try and write something that nobody had written about. And the idea of Belize came to mind. We were posted to Belize in 1982. The day the Falklands kicked off, we went to sunnier climes in Belize. While everybody was zotting off to the cold, we were going to sunnier climes. So I looked around and I couldn't find any. So that was always going to be the subject of the story.
Yeah.
So all I did was I took all the funny stories from the whole of my army career and lumped them into this 6-month tour, operational tour of Belize. It's a serious tour, you know. We were there defending the Belizeans, but I wanted to keep this humorous theme, if you like, a bit like Club 1830s with guns, if you like.
Yeah, I've read that on the cover.
Best description of it David Richardson came up with. So I really wanted to keep this humorous theme.
Yeah. It's a well-established kind of genre, isn't it? The kind of army novel, both in terms of its danger, but also in terms of its kind of boredom and the kind of rituals that you have to get into just to kind of make the time tick over.
That's a really good point. What I wanted to do was keep the humour. I wanted to show the camaraderie, the passion, you know, and what a soldier would do for their country. I wanted to try and keep all that, but I needed the stories as well to run. You know, underlying stories to run through the book as well, finishing with a few shocks as the book came to an end. So, yeah, really good point. And from what I've been told, I think I've achieved it, you know. I'm really pleased.
But you yourself decided to leave the army at a certain point.
Yeah, I did. And it was a hard decision because we moved to a place called Hona, Bergen-Belsen.
From the Second World War.
Yeah. Where the second Auschwitz camp, if you like, is there, and it's a large exercise area, a bit like Salisbury Plain. And all we were doing we were going out firing the artillery guns, coming back into camp, cleaning the guns off, and then going back out. And life was just like every week, every month. Yeah, and I just got bored with it in the end. So I left after about 16 years. But
you feel you found your kind of forte now with writing?
I was only ever going to write one book. I was only going to write British Army on the Rampage. That's why I think the books are the wrong way around. Surrogate Fathers should have been first. But I was only ever going to write the one book. So I put heart and soul into that. And then no sooner as I finished it, David said to me, "So when's the next book due?" And I went, "Well, there isn't a next book." And he goes, "Oh, there should be." So, of course, I used all the stories for Gunners and Grenades that were from this one, made them fit quite well. And then no sooner as I finished that one, I just had this feeling I had to write Surrogate Fathers. And that's when, you know, and that was really hard to write, really emotional.
I bet, yeah. So do you feel now that if you've mined the kind of memoirs as far as you can, that you're going to have to move into fiction?
Oh no, not at all.
Not
at all. I'm writing a book at the moment. It's about our time in Germany. All the funny stories. There's some really ridiculous stories about Germany. It's called Fighting the Red Menace, for obvious reasons.
From the Cold War.
Yeah, of course. So there's some really good stories, and even now, as I've gone through the parts of the book, I'm still remembering stories that are going to have to be saved for another day. Yeah. But people are saying to me, we want the second in the series of Sledge. and I know the story. It's in my head. I haven't done anything with it. It's like a vigilante story, but I need to finish this one. But then there's also now the 6 children's books I've written from Munkarot.
Okay.
That I've been waiting to get near because I still feel quite passionate about them. So there's one of 3 ways I could go at the moment. So it's whichever's going to pull me the hardest, I think.
There must be time for all of them. It would be a shame to kind of have to jettison one thing that you're attracted to.
I'm not that intelligent that I can work on 3 books, that's for sure.
You have to do them all at the same time.
Yeah,
But, you could manage them.
I would like to run the next series of Sledge because I think it's quite an exciting story and something a little bit different. Still military, but a little bit different.
Okay, well, Sean, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks very much for coming in and talking to us today about your work and your writing, and the best of luck with it in the future.
Thank you very much.
Please stay with us for part 2 when we'll meet Philip Battle of Urban Canvas. Author Philip Battle was born in Prescott, Lancashire in 1958 and brought up by his grandmother, Eleanor Rigby. He wrote his first book of poems back in 1978 and became a writer and designer for Breakout magazine in Liverpool. He later became a performance poet and took up a career as an artist and designer. He spent the past 20 years of his life travelling the world as a professional pavement artist. His book, Lady Scrivener, is the story of Alice Coleman, the world's first female pavement artist. At the end of the 19th century, Alice endured inclement weather, overzealous policing, sexism, physical threats, and marriage proposals to support her family by illustrating the streets of London. We met up with him recently to find out more.
Wrote this book called Lady Scrivener, not meaning to write a book about a female pavement artist. I was actually researching another book that was called All My Own Work, which was a complete history of pavement art. Mainly because there's never been a book published on the history of pavement art, and people have basically thought it too lowly a subject to cover as a subject. And I started out, I found these photographs of female pavement artists at the turn of the century. Initially I thought they were all different artists. It didn't connect with me that it was the same person. So what I did is I put a blog together, because I do an online blog as well. I put a blog together and I associated the name of one of the photographs with Alice Coleman, a person called Alice Coleman. I was attracted to Alice's story because she was an outsider, basically. She was an outsider of society. She was working on the fringes of society, and so I thought that would be a really interesting idea for a book. I strongly believe that people working on the outside of society are the people who really change and move society forward, and that's kind of like the inspiration behind the book. And it also gave us the opportunity to set up a thing up that we call Fig Mulberry Press. Fig Mulberry is an old name for a sycamore tree. Horticulturally, sycamore trees are seen as weeds. But a weed is a matter of perception. It's just a plant growing in a place where you don't want it to be. And sometimes pavement artists are a bit like that. They're in places where society doesn't want them to be, or looks down upon them as not being, what they anticipate art to be. Apparently, she was born in 1874, and she started doing pavement art about when she was 19 years of age. She had a tragedy in her life where her husband was a street acrobat. He was performing on a high wire, Victorian high wire, when he fell off and he broke his back, basically. So he became an invalid, which meant that Alice had no money. She had a family to support, and the only way she could do it was to concentrate on a hobby, which had been to draw and stuff, and decided to illustrate the streets of London at the age of 19, just to feed a family, just to make ends meet. You know, every single day she would go out onto the streets. She became known as the Lady Screever, which is what the book is called, Lady Screever, and she became world known, world renowned. Her story was followed throughout the press, as far as Australia, New York, all parts of the globe, really. She was a world famous, almost celebrity, and I thought it was an interesting story because I'm a pavement artist myself, and I've travelled the world, and you know, the difference between pavement art now and pavement art then is well, it's a million miles away. You know, when Alice started in 1893, women didn't even have the vote; they had no voice whatsoever, and she was always well dressed. She took a professional point of view of pavement art. She would turn up at exactly the same time every morning, and she would work through till 8 o'clock in the evening. One of the things that interested me about Alice was the influence she had over the suffragette movement in the turn of the century, with because of her pavement art activity, she actually inspired the suffragettes to do their own chalking art campaign, and they would go out in chalking parties and demonstrate on the streets, and even do art on the streets to collect money for the suffrage movement, the women's movement. And they'd use three colours of chalk, the white, purple and green. And they would. She had a great influence over the women's suffrage movement, and I think that's quite inspiring. Especially now, we've just had a film called Suffragette, which is amazingly the first film to be produced about the suffragettes ever. You know, I mean, it's quite incredible that such a movement has only just now, 100 years on, been covered. There is a misconception about pavement art and about how artists used to be, and they kind of get lumped together with street art, with graffiti, with pavement begging and stuff like that. But she was never a beggar. All the work that she did was professionally done. She had a skill to do it, and it was well regarded as it's kind of like a trade. So if illustrations on the street would make people feel happier about themselves, then they could give money. She never held out her hat and asked for money. Today, pavement art is considered a professional career option. People do make a living out of street art today, and I thought it was the right time to produce this book. Well, we work as Urban Canvas, myself and my partner Catherine, and we're professional pavement artists. We've been pavement artists for about 20 years now, and we've worked all over the country. In fact, we're the only ones in the UK to make a full-time professional living out of it, and we kind of travel all wide and near. We've been to Singapore, Bahrain, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, anywhere you can mention, really. But people may know us because for the last 4 years we've done the Mersey River Festival, and they would have seen us outside the Museum of Liverpool Life. We take over that entire span of area there, and encourage people to get involved and do pavement art there. And we've done some incredible giant octopuses and starfish there, and we've taken over that entire area, you know. So people would have known us from that. And this year we took part in the Three Queens event as well in Liverpool. Next year we're hoping to do similar Liverpool-based events, but most of our work is outside of Liverpool. For the past 2 years we've worked with we've become the only pavement artists to appear at the National Theatre in London, where they actually they see it as a performance art, because it is a performance art, and they kind of like put the deck chairs out, and for 4 hours people can watch us creating art on the pavement. We've got a number of books on the go that we hope to produce. One of it is about Breakout, that early music scene, and I've also got a kind of a book called Growing Up with Eleanor Rigby, and that's more a self-autobiographical book. My grandmother was Eleanor Rigby, and she grew up in Speke, childhood home of Paul McCartney, no less. I've got a follow-up to Lady Screever coming out called London Types, which is about forgotten pavement artists in London from 1850 to 1975, and it's all the characters and these forgotten artists, basically. And I'm really interested in the idea that artists are forgotten and they're just like cast aside and then rediscovered, you know. These lives, you know, because I mean life is so transigent, and it's like almost like a chalk drawing our lives, you know. We sort of live it and then it's erased from all memory. It's gone, it's only here for the moment, you know, until somebody like me, or like anybody, a writer, just discovers them and you know, brings them back into the consciousness again.
If you have any comments or suggestions for the show, please contact us at artsalivebooks@baytvliverpool.com, and we look forward to hearing from you. See you on the next edition of Arts Alive Books. Good night.